The first time my father tried to take my daughter from me, he did it in a navy suit and a church voice. Without me, she'd be homeless, he told the court, with one hand resting on the witness stand like he was swearing on the Bible twice. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the judge. Men like my father always looked at the person with power, never at the person they were hurting. If he had looked at me, he would have seen something that probably would have unsettled him more than tears ever could. I wasn't scared of him anymore. I was terrified, yes. My palms were slick. My knees had been shaking since 9 that morning. My 10-year-old daughter, Lily, was sitting in a private room down the hall with a court-appointed advocate and a box of crayons she was too old to want and too anxious to refuse. My job was hanging by a thread because I'd already missed 3 shifts dealing with hearings, interviews, home checks, and paperwork I never imagined a daughter would need just to prove her father was lying. But I wasn't scared of him. Not in the way I used to be. The courtroom was quiet enough for me to hear the air vent rattling above the clerk's desk. My father had just finished telling the judge how he'd taken me in, how he'd provided stability, how I was emotionally overwhelmed, how Lily needed a real home, not uncertainty. Then Judge Porter leaned forward, folded her hands, and asked one question. Mr. Carter, if your daughter would be homeless without you, why did you call her new landlord and tell her not to rent to her? The room changed. You could feel it. My father blinked once. And for the first time in my life, I watched a man who had always had an answer suddenly run out of words. If you're enjoying stories about real-life challenges, personal growth, and unforgettable life lessons, consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are released regularly, and you won't want to miss the next one. My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my life, my father had 2 versions of himself. The public version was the one everybody loved. Frank Carter was the kind of man who held doors open, donated to church roof repairs, and remembered waitresses' names. He wore pressed shirts even on weekends. He spoke calmly, tipped well when people were watching, and had a way of nodding during other people's problems that made him seem deeply compassionate without ever promising anything inconvenient. The private version was quieter. That was part of what made him so hard to explain. He didn't throw punches. He didn't scream much. He didn't get drunk and smash dishes. If he had, it might have been easier to point at the wreckage and say, "See? There. That's what he is." Instead, my father specialized in smaller things. The kind that make you doubt your own memory. The kind that sound ridiculous out loud. He'd joke about your weight until you pushed your plate away. He'd offer help, then list the cost of it every time you disagreed with him. He'd tell you he was worried about you in the same tone other people used to say "I love you." By the time I was 35, divorced, and raising my daughter on a dental office receptionist's salary, I was still falling for the oldest trick he knew, confusing control with care. 3 years before that court hearing, my life had come apart so fast I barely understood what pieces I was trying to pick up. My ex-husband, Nate, hadn't left because of one huge fight. That would have been cleaner. He left by degrees. First emotionally, then financially, then physically. He started staying late at work, which turned into weekends helping a friend, which turned into a separate checking account, which turned into a woman named Kelsey who understood him. By the time the divorce papers were finalized, he'd moved 40 minutes away into a condo with gray walls and no room for his daughter's drawings on the refrigerator. He paid child support late more often than on time and acted like every field trip and pair of shoes was part of some conspiracy to bankrupt him. I was trying to hold things together when my mother got sick. Pancreatic cancer is one of those phrases that empties a room. There are diseases people fight. There are diseases people survive. Then there are diseases that walk in like they already know where the furniture goes. My mother, Diane, lasted 10 months. For most of those 10 months, I drove from work to her chemo appointments, from chemo appointments to Lily's school pickup, from school pickup to my apartment, where I opened bills at the kitchen table long after Lily was asleep. My savings disappeared first. Then the little emergency fund I'd built after the divorce. Then the credit cards. When Mom got worse, I spent more nights at my parents' house, helping her to the bathroom, changing sheets, managing meds. My father would stand in the doorway some nights and sigh like the weight of the whole family rested on him alone. "Don't know what you girls would do without me," he'd say. Back then, it sounded tired. Almost affectionate. I didn't understand yet that he was planting something. After Mom died, I made it 6 more months in my apartment. I tried everything. I picked up Saturday shifts. I sold furniture. I canceled streaming services, stopped buying coffee, learned how many meals a rotisserie chicken could become if you stretched it with rice and shame. But rent went up, child support stayed unreliable, and grief made everything harder. Even folding laundry felt like carrying bricks. One night I sat on the edge of Lily's bed while she slept and looked around the room I could no longer afford. Her lamp. Her bookshelf. The yellow blanket my mom had sewn for her when she was born. A science fair ribbon taped to the wall. A home is made of ordinary things until you're about to lose it. Then every ordinary thing starts to feel sacred. The next morning, my father called. "I've been talking to your sister," he said. "You need help." I stood in the break room at work with a vending machine humming behind me. "I know. You and Lily can come here for a little while." I should tell you that my first feeling wasn't gratitude. It was dread. Because home, when your father is a man like mine, is never just a place. It's an arrangement. A hierarchy. A debt with no final payment. But I also had $11 in my checking account and a landlord who'd given me until Friday. So I said yes. My father made the offer sound generous in front of everybody. At my mom's memorial luncheon, with casseroles cooling and church ladies hugging too long, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Family takes care of family." People smiled at him like he'd personally invented kindness. What nobody heard was what he said the next morning when he helped carry boxes into his basement. "This is temporary, Emily. I'm not raising another household at my age." "I know. You'll contribute, of course. Of course. You'll keep Lily under control." That phrase should have told me everything. Under control. Not safe. Not happy. Not cared for. Under control. The basement had a bedroom, a small den, and a bathroom that always smelled faintly like bleach. Lily thought it was an adventure at first. She called it our apartment. She loved having stairs. She loved being close to Grandpa because he let her have ice cream after dinner and slipped her 20s for the book fair. I let myself believe maybe age had softened him. It hadn't. The first few months were survivable because my mother's absence still filled the house so completely that even my father seemed careful around it. Her reading glasses were still on the side table. Her garden clogs were still by the back door. Sometimes I'd come upstairs and catch him staring at her chair with a face so blank it was almost frightening. Then little by little, he started rearranging reality. He wanted $800 a month from me for utilities and groceries. That was less than rent, so I paid it. At first I paid cash because that was how he asked for it. "Paper trails make everything messy," he said once, waving off my suggestion of a transfer. It was such a strange thing to say that I remember the exact way the kitchen looked when he said it. Late afternoon. Sun on the counter. Lily at the table coloring a horse blue because real colors are boring. I should have trusted the warning in my body. Instead I nodded. By month 4, my father had opinions about everything I did. He didn't like my work schedule. He didn't like Lily's bedtime. He didn't like that I bought store-brand cereal one week and name-brand the next, because according to him, inconsistency was a sign of poor planning. If Lily forgot a lunchbox at school, that was because I was scattered. If I worked late, that was because I was putting career over family, which was rich coming from a man who'd missed half my childhood baseball games because clients couldn't wait. He never said these things in front of other people. Never in a way that would have sounded ugly if repeated. He'd say, "I'm concerned about you, Em. You seem overwhelmed. Or, Lily needs stability, and kids can sense when their mother is struggling. Or my personal favorite, I'm only being honest because no one else is brave enough to tell you the truth. That's the thing about controlling people. They love the word honest. They use it like bleach, to make cruelty sound hygienic. Lily started hearing more than I wanted her to. One night, about 8 months after we moved in, she sat beside me while I folded towels and asked, "Are we expensive?" I turned to her so fast a towel slipped out of my lap. What? She kept her eyes on the fabric she was smoothing with both hands. Grandpa said being a burden costs more than money. My whole body went cold. What exactly did Grandpa say? She shrugged, but it wasn't casual. It was the shrug kids do when they're protecting an adult. Just that you're trying. I put the towels down. Lily, look at me. She did. You are not expensive. You are not a burden. And if anybody says something that makes you feel like one, you tell me. Okay? She nodded, but there was hesitation in it. That hesitation kept me awake half the night. There are moments in motherhood when fear stops being abstract and turns physical. It becomes a heat in your chest. A pressure behind your ribs. Not because someone has touched your child, but because they have started touching the way your child understands herself. That was the year I finally decided temporary had to end. I started taking online billing certification classes after Lily went to bed. I used headphones and worked from the basement desk while the washing machine thumped in the next room. It took me 7 months, a lot of caffeine, and more crying than I'd ever admit to anybody at work, but I finished. 2 months later, I got promoted. Not to anything glamorous. I became patient accounts coordinator at the same dental office. It meant insurance claims, payment plans, and a lot of phone calls with people already irritated before I said hello. But it came with a raise. Not a giant one. Just enough to let me do dangerous things like hope. I opened a savings account at a different bank. I stopped paying my father cash and told him my new banking app made transfers easier. He didn't like that. What was wrong with cash? Nothing. This is just easier for me. He looked at me for a long second. Easier for you usually means trouble for someone else. I smiled because the alternative was screaming. It means I don't have to stop at the ATM. He accepted the transfers, but something changed after that. He started asking for my schedule more often. He wanted to know when I'd be home. He commented if I stopped for groceries on the way back. He asked why I needed new shoes if money was supposedly tight. He also got sweeter with Lily. That might sound nice. It wasn't. He started taking her out on Saturdays for pancakes. He bought her a pink bike even though I'd told him I was saving for one for her birthday. He let her stay up watching old movies and told her stories about how families stick together when the world gets messy. He was building something with her. Not love. Loyalty. And Lily, being 10 and tender-hearted and still small enough to believe presence meant safety, leaned into it. Then came the first apartment. It was a small 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor of an older building near Lily's school. The carpet was ugly and the kitchen was the size of a hallway, but the windows were big and the landlord had planted geraniums outside the entrance like the place mattered. I toured it on my lunch break and cried in my car afterward. Not because it was perfect. Because it was possible. The landlord, a woman named Sharon Fields, said she liked me. She said if my background check came back clean and my references looked good, the place was mine. I floated for 3 days. Then she called and said she'd gone with another applicant. Was there a problem? I asked. There was a pause. No, she said too quickly. Just timing. I knew that tone. I used that tone with patients when their insurance denied something unfair and I wasn't allowed to say what I thought. Did someone say something to you? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. I don't think it would be appropriate to discuss other communications, she said. Other communications. When I hung up, I sat frozen in the office parking lot with my keys in my hand until my coworker Denise tapped on the window and scared me half to death. Denise had worked front desk with me before my promotion. She was 52, wore bright lipstick like armor, and had a laugh that made anxious people calmer just by hearing it. "What happened?" she asked when she got in the car. I told her. She listened without interrupting, then said, "That landlord didn't reject you because of your credit score." I looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because people don't say other communications unless some idiot called trying to sound important." I stared through the windshield. "You think my father did that?" "I think you didn't look surprised when I said it." That was the worst part. I wasn't surprised. I was hurt. Angry. Sick. But not surprised. When I confronted him that night, he didn't even bother pretending he didn't know what I was talking about. "You're welcome," he said, carving chicken like he was discussing weather patterns. Lily looked between us. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "For saving you from making a stupid decision." I actually laughed. It came out sharp and unbelieving. "You called my landlord?" "Potential landlord." "You had no right." "I have every right to protect my granddaughter from instability. I am her mother." "And you're making emotional choices." He said it so calmly that for one awful second I felt myself shrinking exactly the way he wanted. Back to 14. Back to apologizing for things that were not wrong. Then Lily's fork clinked against her plate. "Grandpa," she said carefully, "Mom's not unstable." He softened his voice instantly. "Sweetheart, nobody said your mom doesn't love you." That did it. I stood up so fast my chair scraped hard against the floor. "Do not," I said, my voice shaking, "talk around me like I'm not in the room. And do not ever call me unstable in front of my daughter." He set the carving knife down and looked up at me with that weary, disappointed expression he used when he wanted to make me look unreasonable. "You see," he said to Lily. "This is what I mean. I wish I could tell you I handled that night with dignity. I didn't. I cried in the basement bathroom with the shower running so Lily wouldn't hear me. Then I sat on the closed toilet lid and stared at the floral wallpaper my mother had picked out 15 years earlier and understood, maybe for the first time in a way I couldn't wiggle out of, that my father would never let me leave if leaving meant losing control over me. That realization didn't make me brave right away. It made me secretive. I found the second apartment 3 weeks later through Denise's cousin. It was in a duplex owned by a widow named Reena Patel whose son had moved to Chicago and convinced her to rent out the upstairs instead of letting it sit empty. The place was modest, bright, and only 15 minutes from Lily's school. Mrs. Patel met Lily, asked her what books she liked, and smiled when Lily said, "The ones where girls figure things out before the adults." We signed the lease in her sunroom over tea. I didn't tell my father. Not that day. Not the next. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. Really, I was waiting until I had enough in motion that he couldn't stop it. I transferred the deposit. I set up utilities. I bought second-hand dishes from Facebook Marketplace. Denise gave me an old microwave. My sister Beth, who lived across town with her husband and twins, said she'd lend me her minivan for moving day. Then, because life likes timing almost as much as my father did, Lily came down with strep. I was juggling antibiotics, missed work, and sleep deprivation when my father found the lease before I could tell him. It had been sent by email, but Mrs. Patel also mailed a signed copy to keep on file. My father still collected the mail first, always had, and he brought the envelope downstairs in his hand like evidence. "What's this?" he asked. There are moments when you know a thing is over before the first raised voice. That was one of them. I took the envelope. "It's exactly what it looks like." He stared at me. "You signed a lease." "Yes." "When were you planning to tell me?" "When everything was set." His jaw flexed. "So you've been sneaking around." I'd been planning. With my granddaughter? With my daughter. He hated when I corrected ownership language. He stepped closer. You think you can take Lily into some cramped little rental and call that an upgrade? I think I can take my daughter into a home where nobody makes her feel like she owes them for breathing. For the first time in years, I saw real anger break across his face before he caught it. You're ungrateful. No. I'm done. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Done? Emily, you don't get done with family obligations because you took a few online classes and got a tiny raise. Lily was at the bottom of the stairs by then, pale from fever, clutching the railing. Mom? I turned immediately. Hey, baby. It's okay. It doesn't sound okay. My father's voice softened again, but now I recognized that softness for what it was, strategy. Lily, sweetheart, your mother and I are discussing grown-up decisions. No, I said. We're not doing that. I packed a bag and took Lily to a motel that night. It was one of those roadside places with stiff towels and a bedspread that smelled faintly like old smoke, but the door locked, and for the first time in months, I slept without listening for footsteps overhead. The next morning, a woman from Child Protective Services called. Her name was Angela Reeves. Her voice was polite and exhausted, like a person who had seen every version of chaos and wasn't eager to see another. She said there had been a report. Neglect. Unstable housing. Emotional volatility. Concerns about my daughter's safety. The blood drained out of me so fast I had to sit on the motel bed. Who made the report? I asked, even though I knew they wouldn't tell me. I can't disclose that. Do you believe it? What I believe is irrelevant. I have to investigate. By noon, I was back at my father's house with a CPS caseworker walking through the basement. By 3, I'd been served with papers in my own driveway. My father was petitioning for temporary emergency guardianship of Lily. I remember staring at the documents while everything around me sounded far away. Birds. A lawnmower. My father's screen door closing behind us. Emergency guard. Emergency guardianship. As if I were dead. As if I'd abandoned her. As if the man who had sabotaged my apartment and driven me into a motel now wanted a medal for the instability he created. Lily stood next to me holding my hand so tightly my knuckles hurt. What does it mean? She whispered. I swallowed hard. It means Grandpa is trying to make a decision that doesn't belong to him. Can he? I looked at the papers again. My name. Her name. Allegations. Hearing date. I don't know, I said, and that was the most frightening answer I'd ever given my child. That week felt like drowning in paperwork. CPS interviews. School contact. Questions about my work hours, Lily's medical records, sleeping arrangements, income, discipline methods, support system. The language of family court is so sterile it almost hides how violent it feels. They don't ask, are you a good mother? They ask whether your child has witnessed emotional dysregulation. They don't ask, did your father lie? They ask whether extended family have expressed safety concerns. My father had hired a private attorney. I found legal aid. That's how I met Tessa Moreno. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, sharp-eyed, compact, the kind of woman who looked like she could read 300 pages in an hour and still notice you were lying about being fine. She met me in a cramped office with mismatched chairs and a flickering lamp. Start from the beginning, she said. I did. Not just the court part. All of it. Nate leaving. Mom dying. Moving in. The rent. The comments. The first apartment. The second. The motel. The CPS report. When I finished, she sat back and asked, do you have proof he contacted the landlord? No. Just a feeling. She nodded once. Feelings don't help much in court. Patterns do. I wanted to cry from exhaustion. What if he wins? He won't, she said. You don't know that. No, she said calmly. But I know men like your father overplay their hand when they think nobody has ever challenged them. I stared at her. She held out her palm. Give me every bank transfer you made to him. Every text message. Every email about the lease. Every childcare arrangement. I want a timeline so detailed it makes your life look boring. That almost made me smile. Then she said, and Emily? Stop telling the story like you were lucky to be there. I frowned. What? You keep saying he took you in. But you paid him. You contributed. You parented your child. He wants the court to see you as a dependent. We need the truth, not his version of charity. That sentence stayed with me. The truth, not his version of charity. I went home that night, not to my father's house, but to Denise's guest room. She'd insisted after hearing about the guardianship petition. I have one bathroom, 2 yappy dogs, and a husband who watches baseball too loud, she said. But I also don't try to steal children, so by comparison it's a luxury resort. Unexpected kindness can undo you faster than cruelty sometimes. I cried in her kitchen while she pretended not to notice and slid a mug of tea toward me. Beth came by the next day. My older sister and I had never been enemies, but she had survived our father by becoming agreeable. Beth specialized in smoothing things over, keeping conversations light, saying things like "that's just how Dad is" with the conviction of someone who had built her whole adult life around not provoking him. She sat across from me at Denise's dining table, hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup. You should have told me about the apartment, she said. You would have told him. She looked down. That was answer enough. I'm not on his side, she said softly. Aren't you? She flinched. And immediately I hated myself a little, because Beth wasn't cruel. She was scared in a different direction than I was. I'm sorry, I said. She shook her head. No. Maybe you're right. Then she exhaled. Dad called me the night you left. He said Lily was frightened and you were acting irrational. I laughed without humor. Of course he did. I didn't know about the landlord, Emily. Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because if he did that, she stopped, swallowing. Then this isn't concern. It's something else. It was the closest she'd ever come to saying it out loud. Tessa moved fast. Within 2 days, she subpoenaed phone records connected to my father's number for the dates surrounding the apartment rejection. She contacted Sharon Fields. At first Sharon refused to get involved. Then Tessa reminded her, in language I wish I could reproduce exactly, that refusing to speak under ordinary discomfort was one thing, but evading a lawful inquiry connected to a custody matter was another. Sharon called back. Yes, a man identifying himself as my father had contacted her. Yes, he said he was deeply concerned about my emotional stability. Yes, he suggested I was prone to dramatic decisions and had put his granddaughter through enough. No, she had not documented the call formally because she assumed it was a family dispute and wanted no part of it. Tessa asked if she would sign a statement. After a pause, Sharon said yes. When Tessa told me, my hands went weak with relief so sudden it almost felt like pain. But she wasn't done. Now for the better part, she said. What better part? Your father claims you're financially dependent on him. I requested records related to a home equity refinance he filed last year. I blinked. Why? Because arrogant people lie in multiple directions. Sometimes they forget those lies have paperwork. 3 days later, she called me into her office. She slid a copy across the desk. On my father's refinance application, under additional household income, he had listed tenant contribution, $800 monthly. I stared at it. He hadn't taken me in. He'd reported me as rental income. To the bank, I was not a struggling daughter he was nobly supporting. I was revenue. Something inside me, something tender and stubborn that had kept trying all these years to translate his behavior into damaged love, finally gave up. I sat there with that paper in my hand and grieved a man who was still alive. Not the real man. The father I kept hoping was buried somewhere under him. That was the midpoint of it all, the twist that changed the story in my own head. Until then, I had still been fighting for custody, for housing, for the right to make decisions for my child. After that, I was also fighting for language. I was done calling exploitation help. I was done calling intimidation concern. I was done calling survival gratitude. The hearing was set for Monday morning. On Friday night, Lily asked me the question I had been dreading. We were in Denise's guest room, surrounded by borrowed blankets and half-packed boxes for the apartment I still had no idea if I'd be allowed to move into on time. Do I have to live with Grandpa if the judge says so? I sat beside her on the bed. I'm doing everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. That's not what I asked. Kids know how to cut through adult language with terrifying efficiency. I took a breath. There's a chance the judge could decide you stay there temporarily while everything gets sorted out. Her face changed. Not into tears. Into something smaller. More contained. I don't want to, she said. I know. She picked at a loose thread on the blanket. He says he's helping us. But every time he helps, my stomach hurts. There it was. The whole thing. Not in legal language. Not in therapeutic phrasing. Just a 10-year-old girl telling the truth from inside her body. I put my hand over hers. Then listen to your stomach. She looked up. What if grown-ups don't believe me? I had no right to promise what I promised next, but I said it anyway. I will. The night before court, I couldn't sleep, so I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't visited my mother's grave in months. Not because I didn't want to. Because I was afraid if I let myself sit still long enough to miss her properly, I'd fall apart and never get back up. I stood there under the yellow wash of a parking lot light and talked to her like a crazy person. I don't know what I'm doing, I said. I know you probably noticed. The wind moved through the trees. I keep thinking maybe if I say it the right way, people will understand. But he always sounds more reasonable than I do. I laughed softly, then wiped my eyes. You knew, didn't you? About him. Maybe not all of it. But enough. That was when I remembered something so small it nearly escaped me. A year before she died, my mother had pulled me aside in the kitchen while my father was out mowing. If you ever need to prove something with your father, she'd said quietly, don't argue. Save receipts. At the time I'd thought she meant taxes. Or bills. Or one of the million practical things mothers say that make sense later. Standing at her grave, I realized she had been warning me in the only way she safely could. I went back to Denise's and slept for 3 hours. Court mornings should not begin with making your child's hair look normal. That detail broke me more than anything else. I could handle documents, legal pads, accusation. But standing in Denise's bathroom, smoothing Lily's ponytail and telling her to hold still while my own hands shook, I nearly lost it. You okay? She asked, watching me in the mirror. No, I said honestly. But I'm here. That counts. It was such a grown-up thing to say that I had to look away. The courthouse smelled like old paper and stale coffee. My father was already there with his attorney, a silver-haired man named Douglas Muir who looked like he billed by the sigh. Beth came too. She stood near the back, twisting her wedding ring. When my father saw me, he gave me a sad little nod. Public Frank. The grieving grandfather. The worried parent of a troubled daughter. It made my skin crawl. Before the hearing, Tessa pulled me aside. We have Sharon's statement, she said. We also have the refinance paperwork and the payment history showing regular transfers from you to him. What if it's not enough? It's enough to tell the truth. That's not the same as winning. Her expression softened. No. It isn't. Then she added, but today he has to answer questions under oath. Men like your father rely on private pressure. Public scrutiny changes the math. The hearing started with my father's attorney painting a picture so clean and distorted it almost impressed me. I was described as emotionally fragile, financially unstable, and in transitional housing. My father was described as a steady family anchor who had graciously housed me and Lily for nearly 2 years out of love and duty. The recent conflict, according to them, had been triggered by my impulsive decision to move into an unsuitable rental without a support system, causing concern for Lily's welfare. Impulsive. That word again. As if women only plan when men approve the plan. Then my father took the stand. If you've never seen someone lie beautifully, it can be disorienting. He didn't overdo it. That was his gift. He never reached for melodrama when concern would do. He talked about my difficult divorce. My grief after losing my mother. My struggles to regain footing. He said Lily needed consistency, that he only wanted temporary guardianship until I was stable enough to provide properly. Then came the line from the beginning. Without me, she'd be homeless. He said it gently. Like it hurt him to admit. And for one flickering second, I felt the old panic rise. The old fear that maybe the whole room would see me the way he described me. A woman who couldn't keep it together. A mother barely hanging on. Then Judge Porter leaned forward and asked him the question. Mr. Carter, if your daughter would be homeless without you, why did you call her new landlord and tell her not to rent to her? Silence. Even Douglas Muir turned. My father blinked. I'm sorry? You contacted Sharon Fields regarding an apartment application submitted by your daughter. Did you or did you not warn Ms. Fields that your daughter was emotionally unstable and should not be rented to? His face did something I had never seen before. Not anger. Calculation failing in real time. I may have spoken to someone, he said carefully, out of concern for my granddaughter. Tessa stood. For the record, Your Honor, we have a signed statement from Miss Fields confirming Mr. Carter discouraged the rental. We also have phone records placing his number to her office. Judge Porter's eyes never left my father. So your testimony is that your daughter would be homeless without you, but you actively interfered with her obtaining housing. That is not how I would characterize it. I didn't ask how you would characterize it. I don't know if I'll ever forget the sound of that. A judge doesn't need to raise her voice to shift the whole room. My father tried again. I believed the apartment was not in Lily's best interest. So you reduced your daughter's housing options while now claiming her lack of housing justifies removing her child. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Judge Porter glanced at the documents in front of her. And while we're clarifying the nature of this arrangement, perhaps you can explain why, on your refinance application, you listed your daughter's monthly payments as tenant income. That came from Tessa, but the judge delivered it like a blade. My father turned to his attorney for half a second, which was all the time it took for me to understand something profound. He had expected to manage me, not evidence. That was an accounting designation, he said. Meaning? She contributed to household expenses. $800 per month on a regular basis, the judge said. That sounds less like charitable support and more like a tenancy. Douglas Muir objected to characterization. Judge Porter overruled him. It gets hazy here, not because nothing happened, but because too much did. Tessa questioned him next. Calm. Precise. No wasted words. Did he open household mail? Sometimes. Did he know I had signed a lease before the CPS report was made? Yes. Did he believe my daughter was in immediate physical danger in my care? He hesitated. Yes or no, Mr. Carter? No. Then why seek emergency guardianship rather than mediation or family counseling? Concern for Lily's emotional welfare. Concern, Tessa pointed out, that somehow intensified only after I arranged independent housing. By then, my father had lost his rhythm. He still tried to sound composed, but he was answering instead of controlling. That was new. Then Sharon Fields testified by phone. Hearing a stranger calmly repeat what my father had said about me was one of the strangest experiences of my life. Mortifying and vindicating at the same time. She admitted she'd been swayed by his confidence. Admitted she thought she was protecting a child from chaos. Admitted, in a voice gone shaky with shame, that she regretted it. I didn't hate her. In some ways, she was proof of how men like my father survive. They borrow authority from people's assumptions. Then Beth did something I still think took more courage than anyone realized. She asked to speak. Douglas Muir objected. Judge Porter allowed limited testimony because Beth had submitted a statement earlier in support of my father's petition, and now she wished to amend the record. Beth walked to the stand looking like she might faint. She admitted our father had called her the night I left and told her I was irrational. She admitted she believed him at first because that was easier than examining years of similar behavior. Then she looked directly at the judge and said, voice shaking, "But I was wrong. My father has always confused obedience with stability. My sister did not become unfit because she tried to leave. She became inconvenient." I put my hand over my mouth. My father stared at her like betrayal was a language he had never expected his daughters to learn. The judge then heard from Angela Reeves, the CPS worker, who stated there was no evidence of abuse, substance issues, or unsafe parenting. Transitional housing, she said, was being addressed. My work was stable. Lily was bonded to me. The concern arose primarily from family conflict and the pending move. Family conflict. Such a tame phrase for the damage one person can do inside a house. I testified last. I wish I could tell you I was eloquent. I wasn't. I was honest. I said I had made mistakes. I said I should have left sooner. I said grief and financial hardship had cornered me into choices I hated. I said I was embarrassed I'd needed help. Then I corrected myself. No, I said, hearing Tessa in my head. I was embarrassed I accepted terms I should never have confused with help. Judge Porter looked at me over her glasses. I told the court about Lily asking if she was expensive. About the first apartment. About the motel. About the constant reminder that everything we had came at my father's pleasure. Then Tessa asked me one final question. Ms. Carter, why didn't you tell your father about the second apartment immediately? I took a breath. Because I knew if he had time, he'd try to stop me. There it was. The whole story in one sentence. When the testimony ended, Judge Porter recessed for 20 minutes. 20 minutes is not a long time unless your child's future is waiting at the end of it. I sat on a hard hallway bench with Lily's advocate, a kind woman named Marjorie, while Lily colored in the private room nearby. Tessa stood at the vending machine pretending to read emails so I'd have space. Beth sat beside me without speaking. After a while, she said, "Mom knew." I turned. Beth's eyes were wet. She knew more than I let myself admit. I think that's why she always insisted on separate bank accounts. I stared ahead. Why didn't we talk about it? Because talking about it meant doing something about it. That hit with the force of truth. A lot of families aren't held together by love. They're held together by what nobody is willing to name. When we were called back in, my legs felt rubbery. Judge Porter did not take long. She denied the emergency guardianship petition. She found no basis for removing Lily from my custody. She noted that my father's efforts to interfere with my housing substantially undermined the credibility of his claim that he was acting solely in my daughter's best interest. She ordered no further unilateral contact between him and Lily pending a family counseling recommendation and warned him, in language so precise it sounded almost kind, that misuse of protective systems to gain leverage in family disputes was a very serious matter. Then she looked at me. Ms. Carter, this court encourages you to secure independent housing as planned and maintain stability for your daughter. Based on the record before me, you are her appropriate custodial parent. It's strange what your body remembers. Not the exact wording. Not the lawyers shuffling papers. Not even the sound of the gavel. What I remember is the first full breath I took afterward. It felt foreign. Like air after being underwater too long. Lily ran to me in the hallway and wrapped both arms around my waist. "Are we okay?" she asked into my coat. I knelt and held her face in my hands. "We're okay." That was the first time I said it and meant it. My father came out of the courtroom 10 minutes later. Alone. His attorney had gone ahead to take a call. Beth was standing across the hall with her back to him, and for the first time in my life, he did not have an audience. He looked older than he had that morning. Not broken. Men like my father don't break cleanly. But diminished, maybe. As if the world had failed to agree with him for once and he didn't know where to set the blame. "Emily," he said. I turned slowly. This didn't have to happen. It was such an absurd sentence that I almost smiled. "You're right," I said. "You could have let me leave." His jaw tightened. "You're making me the villain." "No," I said. "I'm just done volunteering for the part you wrote for me." For a second, I thought he might say something cutting, something final and cruel enough to restore his balance. Instead he said, "After everything I've done for you." And there it was. The old coin. The old debt. Only now it sounded cheap. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who had mistaken usefulness for love for so long that he no longer knew the difference. "Helping someone so they can never leave you isn't love," I said. "It's possession." Then I walked away. Moving day happened 2 days later. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because ordinary things keep insisting on themselves even after catastrophe. Boxes still need taping. Utilities still need turning on. Children still need lunches packed. Denise and her husband helped with the heavier furniture. Beth brought her minivan and 3 sets of clean towels. Mrs. Patel met us with a plate of samosas and an extra key. "Every home should begin with food," she said. Lily ran from room to room deciding which corner was best for her beanbag chair. The apartment was smaller than the fantasy version I'd built in my head, but it was ours. The radiator hissed. The kitchen drawer stuck. The bathroom light buzzed a little. And when I put my key in the lock that first night, nobody could take the home from me by changing the story of what they were doing. 3 weeks later, Lily's school counselor called me in. I braced myself, but she smiled. "Nothing bad," she said. "I just wanted you to know Lily seems lighter." Lighter. I hadn't realized how much weight children can carry without words for it. At home, Lily started sleeping through the night again. She laughed more. She invited a friend over without asking if the apartment was good enough. One evening while we were making spaghetti, she looked around the kitchen and said, "It's weird." "What is?" "My stomach doesn't hurt here." I had to turn back to the stove so she wouldn't see my face. My father sent 2 letters over the next month. The first was angry. Full of blame, revision, injury. He accused me of humiliating him, poisoning Lily against him, and turning private family matters into public spectacle. The second was softer, which made it more dangerous. It talked about misunderstandings, family bonds, mistakes made on all sides. I responded to neither. Tessa told me I didn't owe him emotional labor just because he shared my DNA. That was another sentence I wrote down and kept. Beth and I started talking for real after that. Not the surface version. The real one. About our mother. About the things she covered with cheerfulness. About how Beth survived by complying and I survived by resisting, and how both strategies had cost us more than we knew. One afternoon, while helping me hang curtains, Beth said, "I used to think keeping the peace was the same thing as being kind." I nodded. I used to think needing less from him would make him gentler. Neither of us said what came next out loud, but it hung there anyway. He had trained us both around his weather. Now we were learning climate somewhere else. Months passed. Court-ordered family counseling was offered. I agreed to individual sessions for Lily and me. My father refused the first recommendation because he said the therapist seemed biased. Then the second because he didn't believe in therapeutic interference. In the end, his own refusal did more to define him than anything I could have said. Lily wrote him a short note with her counselor's help. It said, "I love you, but I need grown-ups who make me feel safe." I don't know whether that changed him. I know it changed me. Because I stopped trying to fix what she and I had survived. I started trying to build from it instead. I got better at my job. Mrs. Patel lowered the rent slightly after 6 months because, as she put it, good tenants are worth more than market trends. Denise became the kind of friend who lets herself into your kitchen with groceries and opinions. Beth started bringing her twins over on Sundays, and our apartment got loud in the best way. On the 1-year anniversary of the hearing, Lily and I bought a cake from the grocery store bakery. Nothing fancy. White frosting, strawberries on top. We ate it at our tiny kitchen table and called it Freedom Cake. "What are we celebrating exactly?" she asked with frosting on her lip. I thought about it. "Truth," I said. She considered that. "And keys." I laughed. "Definitely keys. There are still hard parts. I still freeze sometimes when an unknown number calls. I still over-explain myself to authority figures. I still catch my father's voice in my head when I make a purchase I haven't justified enough. Healing, I've learned, is not a staircase. It's more like learning not to sit down every time an old chair appears behind your knees. But I know this now. A person can feed you and still starve your spirit. A person can shelter you and still make you feel homeless. A person can call control protection so many times that even you begin to repeat it. Until one day somebody asks the right question. And the whole lie collapses under the weight of a truthful answer. The biggest lesson wasn't that my father was capable of hurting me. Some part of me had always known that. The lesson was that being related to someone does not require you to hand them the pen and let them write your reality. Love without respect is not love. Help with strings tied around your throat is not help. And stability built on fear is just another form of instability wearing a nicer shirt. The judge's question changed my case. But the real change happened when I finally stopped waiting for a man like my father to become the kind of father I deserved. That waiting had cost me years. Letting go gave some of them back. Now, when Lily asks what home means, I don't say mortgage or blood or sacrifice. I say this. Home is the place where nobody keeps score of your existence. Home is where help doesn't come with humiliation. Home is where your body unclenches before your mind even notices. And if you ever have to choose between disappointing someone who demands your obedience and protecting the peace your child feels in her own bones, choose the peace. Choose it early. Choose it loudly if you have to. Choose it even if the whole world calls that selfish before it learns better. Because sometimes the most important thing you'll ever teach your child is that love should feel safe, not owed. And sometimes justice doesn't arrive as a miracle. Sometimes it arrives as one clear question, asked at the exact moment a lie expects to go unchallenged. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more.